All right, thank you. Good morning. Welcome to the Affordable Housing Professionals webinar, A Crisis Within a Crisis, responding to the impacts on housing of the COVID-19 situation. My name is Ed Schmier. I'm the president of AHPNJ, and we're delighted to have so many of you join us this morning for a very hot topic in the area in which we try to provide advice and some direction. As many of you know, affordable housing is being pressed under the COVID guidelines right now. Some of the eviction legislation will expire at the end of this year. A number of towns are looking into what they can do in order to protect folks from evictions. And the housing crisis is only going to get worse, unfortunately, until we get out of this health pandemic. So we're delighted. We have a number of you attending, about 40 or so. And without any further ado, I'd like to turn this matter over to my colleague, Mark Leckington, who will make some introductory remarks and then introduce our panel. And we hope you'll enjoy our program. Mark, it's all yours.
Thank you, Ed. Good morning, everyone. On behalf of the program committee at AHPNJ, I'm pleased to welcome you all to a program that's a little bit different than the normal AHP content. Rather than provide guidance on navigating some new affordable housing regulations or discussing an innovative approach to creating affordable housing, we've created a program to share some information on what we think has the potential to become the greatest housing crisis of our lifetimes. Job losses and the reduction in wages due to the COVID-19 pandemic have affected tens of millions of Americans. And while eviction moratoria have been helping keep these families in place, thereby reducing the spread of the virus, they are not a long-term solution to the problem. As our panelists will help illustrate today, the sheer number of people that may be threatened with eviction over the next few months could overwhelm the capacity of our established housing assistance programs. Additionally, the act of lifting, say, a statewide eviction moratorium will also concentrate the demand for assistance into a short period of time. Even those tried and true programs being run in our urban centers and counties may find demand far exceeds the processing capacity. For those of us working in small and rural communities around the state where nonprofit partners and public assistance are sparse, the local affordable housing professionals may find themselves becoming an essential worker on this issue. We may find ourselves needing to collaborate with a new group of partners. After all, our systems and processes for affordable housing application may prove to be useful to a team attempting to develop a rental assistance program from scratch. Neighboring towns may find the need to collaborate and partner with each other, as well as with the county and state. For example, one urban county in New Jersey is developing a single portal for all tenants in the county needing assistance. As applications are approved by the county, they will attempt to match them with available funding from the county, local, and nonprofit sources. Novel approaches and interventions may also be needed in how evictions are processed. It may prove useful to include a mediation step in the court process to help keep tenants in place, much like the mediation that helped so many people avoid foreclosure in the mortgage market meltdown just 10 years ago. I think it's worth reminding everyone that tenants living in our state Mount Laurel, Doctrine, and affordable housing units are not insulated against this issue. Unlike the Section 8 or housing choice vouchers, the tenant's share of rent is not adjusted as household income changes, where the difference is made up by the housing subsidy. Instead, rent on Mount Laurel units in New Jersey is set by a formula when they're initially put into service and increases with the annual allowable increases. As we sit here today, there's bills in various committees in our state and Senate Assembly. There are also discussions taking place and proposals being considered in Congress. However, it remains unclear how any of these programs will be funded and how they will be rolled out or administered. Will programs be run at a state or a county level? Will funds be pushed through the Community Development Block Grant Program or Emergency Solutions Grant, like much of the CARES Act funding targeting low and moderate income people? If we are fortunate enough to have a large-scale assistance program, we may see barriers to access these programs that we can help address and overcome at the local level. There may be a need to provide technical assistance and technology to help our most vulnerable residents apply to these programs. Devices, internet access, and tailored tech support may be a difference maker in some households. Lastly, I've been tasked with letting you know that periodically during the presentation today, questions will pop up on your screen. These are especially important for anyone seeking continuing education credits for the session today. A total of 6 questions will pop up on your screen. You're required to answer at least 5 of them in order to receive your CEU credit. If you have any questions for our panelists, please put them in the chat box. We have people keeping an eye on that, and we'll do our best to either answer them in the chat or bring them to the panel. Speaking of the panel, we've assembled a group of people today working on this issue from on different fronts. We have Katie Brennan, the Chief of Staff from New Jersey Housing Mortgage Finance Agency. HMFA is in a unique role in the state's affordable housing. In addition to administering the low-income housing tax credit program and offering various loan products, they are also the largest administrative agent in the state, approving sales and rentals of Mount Laurel Doctrine affordable housing units all over New Jersey. They also play a large role in oversight of project-based housing vouchers, and most recently implemented the Small Landlord Emergency Grant Program to help address this very topic we're here to talk about today. There is no state agency that has a view of this issue from so many perspectives as HMFA. In addition, we have Peter Boynton he's the Director of Community Action Programs and Emergency Housing at the Affordable Housing Alliance of New Jersey. AHA also serves as an administrative agent in New Jersey, but also provides a wide variety of financial services and programs, including emergency assistance. Peter is going to be sharing data and insights from New Jersey's frontline. But first, we're going to hear from Alieza Durana. Forgive me. Alieza is a journalist working at Princeton University's Eviction Lab. You may recognize Alieza's name from her Washington Post editorial that she co-authored with Matthew Desmond on this topic. And speaking of names, you might also recognize Matthew Desmond as the author of the New York Times bestseller Evicted. Matthew also serves as the principal investigator at the Eviction Lab. Alieza will share some of the lab's latest findings and data on this issue and help us put this information into some historical context. And with that, I'll turn it over to you, Alieza. Welcome.
Thank you so much. So I think I have a presentation if it's about to start. So wonderful. Thank you so much. So as Mark mentioned, I'm Alieza Durana. I'm a journalist and media strategist with the Eviction Lab at Princeton University. Today, I'm going to talk a little bit about the state of eviction and then move pretty quickly, because I know that you all are very aware of the housing crisis, particularly in New Jersey. I'll move a little bit more quickly into our recent analysis. So if you do have questions in the meantime, let me know. I'll be checking the chat box as well. You can go ahead and move forward on the slide. So for those of you who aren't aware, the Eviction Lab is a research institute at Princeton University based in the sociology department. We grew out of Matt Desmond's dissertation research. He spent time living and working in Milwaukee, trying to understand the prevalence and causes of the housing crisis, and realized that evictions were a much more common experience than had ever previously been realized. I think that it was something that was very much appreciated by or well known in organizing and activist communities, but perhaps not at a broader cultural level in the United States. So he, along with our team, set out to found the first nationwide database of evictions. So we base our research off of court filings, which we have from 48 states in the District of Columbia, and they're available on our website. If you could just go on to the next slide, please. So the main, goal of ours as a lab, we think of, our data as a public good, and we try to make, this problem of the housing crisis visible. So what you're looking at actually are eviction rates across the country. And while it probably does not surprise you all, what I think is important for people new to this issue is that eviction is an experience, a trauma that affects communities across the United States, affects rural communities, suburban communities, urban communities in both red and blue states. It is not just a big, expensive city problem as might have been previously thought, that housing is just expensive in San Francisco or New York. If you can go on to the next slide, please. And this is really sort of from our perspective, a confluence of multiple trends coinciding. So one is that incomes have become stagnant over time, particularly in the last 3 decades. What you're looking at is Census Bureau data of median household income by educational attainment. You can go to the next slide, please. At the same time, rents have risen, and they again haven't just risen in New York or the tri-state area. They've also risen in the Midwest, in the South, in the Northeast, and other parts of the Mountain West. So we'll go to the next slide, please. What that has meant is that households have an ever shrinking paycheck that contributes towards rent payments every month. So, in a typical pre-pandemic year, and I think that as we, oh, sorry, it sounds like there's some, just want to check and make sure the audio is okay. But, in a normal pandemic year, we would expect to see around 3.7 million eviction cases filed, or about 7 each minute. So put differently, in 2016, when unemployment was under 5%, we were still seeing a population the size of Seattle be evicted every single month. So as we think about moving forward, the quote unquote normal, that was quite dysfunctional. The pandemic hit in the middle of an already, pretty dire housing crisis. The moratoria that we've seen over the last several months have helped, stall to a certain extent some eviction filings. But this is a useful, I think, context as we think about what will happen when state, local, and very soon the federal moratorium lifts. Next slide, please. So this is just a slide sort of highlighting how, in places that you would normally think of, such as, Centerville, Illinois, or Tulsa, Oklahoma, or Richmond, Virginia, renter house, these are some of our actually, top evicting cities and towns around the US, that it's not just a big city problem. If you can go ahead and move to the next slide, please. Thank you. Prior to the pandemic, as you all are probably well aware, as people working sort of on the front lines, most families who qualified for rental assistance do not receive it. Again, this is data from the American Housing Survey, but 3/4 of renting families below the poverty line were not able to access housing assistance, and this is due to 2 things: both that the amount of money that has been available historically has been shrinking over time, and at the same time, because of rising rents and stagnant wages, there are more and more families that really need to access these funds. Zooming forward to 2020, we saw that the city of Houston ran through their emergency rental assistance in 90 minutes back in May. So, thinking about what we need moving forward, absolutely, there's certainly a very, pressing and dire need for immediate rental assistance, but it's also, the scope of the problem is, bigger than any one city or state. If you can go ahead and move to the next slide, please. So this is just a graph from the American Housing Survey showing that, most low-income families devote over half of their income to housing. If you could go to the next slide, please. So I'm going to move into the portion of the presentation about, what we're seeing now in our data. And to step back a second, we collect our data from county courts, which is where eviction records are kept. Unfortunately, most states and the federal government do not study evictions. They do not collect this data. So what that means is that it often takes the lab several months, if not years, to collect records for the full US. The following data that I'm going to be sharing is actually from a new tool that we built during the pandemic. So we have been digitally scraping court records from 27 cities across the US. Sorry, this is being updated weekly, so we're going to have new numbers at 3 p.m. today. But in the 27 sites that we're now tracking, as of yesterday, we had already tracked 155,774 eviction filings since March. Now, our data are only capturing about 1 in 5 renter households at this point in time because we can't currently scrape data for the full US, but this is, I think very important context that we're only seeing a small piece of the pie, but that, that important piece is absolutely alarming. You can move on to the next slide, please. So a couple of things, I think I was asked to talk a little bit today about what we've seen over time. And we've actually seen different trends across different cities in the United States with regard to eviction filings. And this is often based on local characteristics. So in thinking about, what can folks in New Jersey do, state and local moratoria really do matter. We have seen a lot of variation across cities based on how comprehensive and robust the local policies are. So what I'm about to show you are 2 different cities. So on the one hand, Boston as a low filings city, and then on the other hand, Kansas City as a high filing city. So both Boston and Kansas City had local moratoria in effect. However, Boston's was much, much more comprehensive and lasted much longer. So as you can see in this graph, filings were quite high in Boston until the moratorium was put into effect. They zeroed out for several months. And now that that moratorium is lifted, we're starting to see filings increase, but they're increasing relatively slowly. If you go to the next slide, please. On the other hand, a city like Kansas City had a less comprehensive moratorium in effect. It also lifted around the same time as the CARES Act did. So, Kansas City has already seen filings far surpass historical averages that we have for the area. This is what we are expecting to see as the federal moratorium also lifts, in the absence of a really strong local order. So if you'll go to the next slide, please. So the graph that you're looking at is weekly eviction filings in 2020 relative to historical averages that we have. So this is a week by week, bar chart. I think the important thing to sort of focus on right now, the 2 sort of reddish orange bars are the 2 weeks after the CARES Act expired and before the CDC order went into effect. So they often ask us, what's going to happen when the CDC order lifts on December 31st? What did we see? We saw a massive spike in filings by landlords across the board. It was certainly higher in places that did not have a local moratorium, but this was a spike that, again, far exceeded historical records that we have. So, what are we expecting in January when the CDC order expires? This is something that keeps me up at night. I know it keeps Matt up at night, but, if you're not lucky enough to live in a place with a local moratorium, this is, the type of eviction filings trend that we are expecting. If you'll move to the next slide, please. So the other, not only are we expecting filings to increase, this is actually analysis that we're going to be publishing tomorrow on our website. So just to back up for a second, historically, the eviction lab in studying eviction cases has seen that tenants are usually evicted for small amounts of money. Tenants are usually and historically evicted for about or less than a month's rent. So in a place like Houston, tenants are typically evicted for about $1,000. However, in the last 2 to 3 months, so since August, we have actually seen a very dramatic change in how much money people are being evicted for. So this graph, we're looking at eviction claim amounts, so like rental debt that tenants have that they're being filed against for 4 cities. So for Cincinnati, Houston, New York City, and Phoenix. So if we want to think about or just look at New York City alone, since y'all are close by, so, New York City had fairly typical it's the green line. They had fairly typical filings in January, February, and March, business as usual prior to the pandemic. New York City then put in an eviction moratorium, which is why there's no line between March and July, because eviction filings were basically zeroed out for those months. There were almost none in the city. But as soon as that lifted, and as soon as the the CARES Act order also lifted, we've seen sort of a spike in the amount of money that people are being filed against. And this also coincides with, the time frame in which unemployment assistance dramatically reduced. So instead of people being evicted for $2,500 as they were, last year, they're being evicted for $5,000. The other thing that is important to keep in mind is that we also know where these evictions are happening. They're happening in predominantly low-income communities or neighborhoods measured by census block groups, and they're predominantly affecting Black, Latinx, and women tenants, and particularly mothers of color. So, folks who have been historically hard hit by racial and gender discrimination in our housing market, folks who are already, feeling the brunt of this legacy of discrimination, they are also being hardest hit right now. You go to the next slide, please. Again, this is a graph just illustrating the massive spike in rental debt that we're seeing. And I mostly am bringing this to your attention right now because I think that this is something that absolutely should inform, policymaking moving forward. This is an amount of debt that will quickly become a poverty trap and cause poverty for families facing eviction who lost a job through no fault of their own earlier this year. And in addition to owing that rental debt, families might accumulate late fees and interest on this rental debt that could become an unpayable amount of money and poverty trap for these families and communities, again, through no fault of their own. So while this would have been a cheaper thing to have fixed earlier in the year, to have addressed and helped families stay housed and stay well, the amount of money that it's going to take to make ends meet for tenants and therefore also for landlords is rising. So this is, again, analysis that we're going to be publishing on our website tomorrow. I'm just giving a quick preview. And next slide, please. I think we're about set. So just a couple of takeaways. We have seen that states, counties, and cities have enacted moratoria. They have been effective, but most effective when they freeze either all stages of the eviction process or at the very least the filing of an eviction and notice to the tenant. So the first 2 stages of the eviction process. The other takeaway is that, we can't talk about moratoria in a vacuum. Rent relief, we're seeing in our data that, tenants and families and communities need immediate and generous rent relief, especially now that the winter is hitting. I know it's starting to get cold on the East Coast. So, this is absolutely something that the tenants need as quickly as possible. Next slide, please. And I think we're all. So, a couple of things, and I'm happy to sort of share these takeaways also with folks after the call, but, eviction filings this year were initially dampened because of the success of moratoria. So, let's not forget that some of the emergency policies, the important protest movements that we saw this year, they are having an effect. But that means that, this is useful information as we think about how to tackle the housing crisis and how to address, housing as a human right in New Jersey and beyond. The second, as I mentioned, is that moratoria do work if they're crafted in a comprehensive way. And, at the bottom, we have a body of research I'm happy to share with anyone who's interested. We have historically known that, families with children, families experiencing domestic violence, Black mothers in particular, these are families that are disproportionately at risk for eviction through no fault of their own. And, who we're also seeing disproportionately affected by this year's crisis, and therefore also in need of our support and solidarity and mutual aid. So with that, I'm going to stop and make way for the other presentations. But thank you so much for having me today. Please let me know if you have questions. We do make all of our research papers. We buy the rights so that they're free and available to the public, and our data is also available on our website in aggregate form. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Alieza. That was really interesting. I jotted down a bunch of questions, but I'm going to save them for till we get to the sort of the panel phase. But just before we move on, easiest way for people to stay in touch about your research is the website evictionlab.org, correct?
Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
There's a mailing list, if I'm not mistaken, that you can sign up for.
There is a mailing list you can sign up for. We host a database called Just Shelter that also helps funnel tenants to local legal and social service resources. So, if there are organizations in New Jersey that aren't on our list, that let us know. We welcome feedback and collaboration. But yes, that's best way to stay in touch. Thank you.
Excellent. We're going to pause for a brief moment while we push out the first of our poll questions. We'll give everybody a chance to respond to that, and we will then move over to Katie Brennan. All right. It looks like we're just wrapping up. We've almost got everybody participated. Katie, would you mind unmuting yourself and joining us?
Hi, good morning, everybody. My name is Katie Brennan. I'm the Chief of Staff at the New Jersey Housing and Mortgage Finance Agency, and I'm pleased to be with you all today. Short introduction on us for those who may not be familiar, and some of the recent work we've done that is relevant to today's conversation. I don't have a presentation, so I'm happy to take any questions when we get to the panel component. So New HMFA is the state housing finance agency. Every state has one. We finance the creation of primarily multifamily affordable housing, whether that's small special needs developments or 100-unit buildings with mixed income and retail and everything else. And we also do first-time and low and moderate income homebuyer mortgages. We have a $10,000 down payment assistance program, which is the primary driver and very popular. So we are the financing agency for affordable housing in New Jersey. During this time in COVID, we've had to expand what that looks like and how we can influence the affordable housing dynamics and market in New Jersey. Some of the things that we did right off the bat are that we froze our own rents to make sure that they would not be raised during this time. I do have resources that I can share in the chat later of how you look up whether a building is eligible for that freeze. Same thing with the federal ones, although those are expiring. The other thing that we did was we worked on and wrote the executive order for the use of security deposits. So that seems like a long time ago, but it's still eligible. tenants in New Jersey are able to use their security deposits and apply that towards missed rent. And that considers them whole if they're able to do that. We additionally expanded our housing counseling program. So a couple years ago, there was a massive legislative expansion for foreclosure mediation assistance. And now it is required that if you enter foreclosure mediation, you have to have a housing counselor free of charge, because we know that people are so much more likely to succeed if you have an advocate on your side. Just makes sense. If you're going into effectively a contract law negotiation, you might as well have some representation. So we were able to expand that at the beginning of COVID-19 to be all homeowners in any stage of need of assistance and renters. So while that number has exploded, I do want to continue to push that out as we have people are getting those notices. They can't be evicted, but they are getting the notices in New Jersey, which is very confusing for tenants. Or how do you negotiate missed or paying back rent or some kind of workout plan? Please, please, please encourage everyone you know to reach out to a housing counselor, because it is free of charge. And all of those participating are listed on our website, and that is additionally something I can share. Last is the Small Landlord Emergency Grant Program. We had 2 rounds. We, like many of our colleagues in different housing finance agencies, really struggled with this program. We really struggled. While in New Jersey, it is a known universe of everybody that will qualify, the application rate was extremely low. Landlords just didn't apply, or then they didn't have the right recommendation, or they weren't current on taxes, and there was a lot of things out of our control. So any of the money that was not spent on that was diverted towards the DCA rental assistance program to make sure that we were protecting tenants and that those payments were getting to landlords. I'm happy to take more questions about that as that program wraps up, and ideas that we have for what would make it more successful should we get any additional federal money or state money in the future. Thank you.
Thanks, Katie. That was, that's really good that you, all the work that's going on, and especially with the freezing of the rents. I'm sure that was very helpful to a lot of people. So I think we need to pause again for a quick question. I'm sorry about this. This was something that the CEU organizations asked us to do. So Lindsay, if you wouldn't mind pushing up another one for us. And while people take that, I'm going to very slowly transition over to Peter Boynton. Peter's comes to us from the Affordable Housing Alliance, and he and I spent some time on the phone yesterday, and I think you'll all find some of his information and perspective on this issue eye-opening. And Peter, maybe give it a couple more seconds for people, and then if you wouldn't mind jumping in.
Good morning, everyone. It is an honor and a privilege to spend this time with you. I know in our current pandemic, everyone is overwhelmed, and so time is a commodity that we don't get back and that few of us can afford to waste. So I want to be a good steward of your time. I want to share some useful information with you as quickly as possible and to allow you to interact with me as best as you can. If you have any questions, please feel free to interrupt me. I don't mind being stopped mid-sentence, so if there are any questions, feel free to add them in the chat. I will try to address them, and of course, we have the time of our panel discussion. I'd like to just do some brief introductions, if I could. On our next slide, you'll see what our organization does. My name, of course, is Peter Donnell Boynton, and my elevator speech to everyone is that my job is to end poverty and homelessness in Monmouth County. That's done primarily by working with a network of affiliates who help me identify individuals within Monmouth County who are at or below 200% of the federal poverty limit. I am slightly grateful for some of the expanses we've had during the pandemic. We used to only be able to assist individuals who are at 125% of the federal poverty limit. If you look at the numbers here, you know that if you are a single individual trying to rent in New Jersey, that $25,000 is not a lot of money. At 125%, that was only $15,000. And so there were very few single individuals who would qualify. We would often have families who were seeking assistance. During the pandemic, of course, we're now seeing that individuals who previously would not have qualified for our program, they were making, in some cases, six-figure salaries, are now for the first time having to seek help and are navigating a landscape that they are just completely unfamiliar with. And so what I tell individuals is that our company functions as a safety net. Community action agencies effectively are able to utilize their funding based on the needs of their county. And so what we've done is we've focused on two aspects of housing. Number one, creating a net for those individuals who have housing and are about to fall into homelessness. So we're able to prevent them from completely falling into homelessness and provide a vehicle that allows them to climb up out of homelessness and to create a degree of stability. And so we're able to do that by leveraging some programs that I will talk about a little bit later that are key in not just providing financial assistance, but really focusing on some of the contributing factors that individuals are experiencing while they're in poverty and help them overcome some of those things so that they're able to increase their income, decrease their debt, and really create new opportunities, not just for those individuals, but for their children, so that future generations are able to earn more, to live better, and to have better lives. If we can go to the next slide. I'd like to do just a really brief big picture statement. And if you look at the graph, you'll see that this is a percent change in employment for individuals. And for me, this is critical because we have individuals who in New Jersey in general, but especially in Monmouth County, were doing fairly well. So if you look at the graph, you'll see that there's a red line which identifies the individuals who are making the most, then green, and then blue. For individuals who are the lowest income, when they lost their jobs, they did not have an opportunity to return to many of those jobs because they were working in restaurants, a lot of direct service industries, and they were not able to return because many of those either had to reduce staff or remain closed, or some of them shut down permanently. As we work our way up the economic ladder, those individuals who are skilled laborers may have had a little bit of a decrease, but once things began to open up, the demand for their services increased, and so many of them were able to bounce back. And of course, those individuals near the top who are licensed professionals, who are more than just skilled laborers or are executives, were able to transition from one company to another, or companies were willing to bring them back after a furlough in order to ensure that they were able to stabilize their bottom line. And so if you look at the bottom, you'll see that there are a few little markers at the bottom when the pandemic actually began, and then when the various moratoriums were lifted in that little space between the two calendar dates. That's significant for us because what we're looking at that point is when individuals started to do better, who was able to do better? Who was able to leverage the resources that they had in order to stabilize their circumstances without assistance? And as you see, the individuals who were doing the worst had the greatest difficulty. But that green line is something that I would like to draw everybody's attention to very briefly, because that's where I think the greatest need is. And I think that that is the line where we're not seeing a lot of emphasis placed. For individuals who previously were in poverty, they know the resources that are available. They're used to dealing with the social service agencies. They know what's required. They're able to navigate that, and they can get the help that they need in order to weather the storm. For those individuals who've not operated in poverty for any length of time, there is an impact that happens when you're given the stress of not being able to pay your $2,000 a month rent, when your car note is due or your lease is due, and you need that car to be able to search for, a better job because the area that you live in is usually a residential area and you need to travel outside of that in order to find gainful employment. And so for those individuals, we're finding that they're having the greatest difficulty finding help, learning where to access the resources that they need. And in addition, their debt is usually significantly higher than agencies such as myself are set up, to assist. If you have a subsidized rent and your portion is $500, $600, $700, if you fall behind 3 months, we can work with a $2,000 debt. We can work with other agencies if it's slightly above that. If you're paying $2,000 a month and you fall 3 months behind, at $6,000, that exceeds what we're able to do. And in many cases, many of these individuals don't reach out until after they've expended all of their resources. So they've exhausted their savings. Some of them have exhausted their retirement, have taken loans against that. And some of the landlords have allowed them to even use credit cards in order to pay their rent. And so they have a massive debt that's occurring. And if we go to the next slide, we'll be able to see some of the impact. The compounding factors. First, there was a beautiful study that was done, Poverty Impedes Cognitive Function. My background is psychology, so forgive me for all of the references, but the physical state of poverty has an impact on an individual's ability to make decisions, and we know and understand that. And for individuals who've not had to exist in that state, the stress often causes them to make decisions that they would not have made. So individuals who've learned how to manage their finances, have learned how to juggle, massive decisions, have not had to deal with decisions of how to pay back things that they have no resources for. I don't know where to go or who to ask or what to do. I've not had to rob Peter to pay Paul in my lifetime or in many years. And so figuring out that landscape, figuring out what they're allowed to do, knowing when they can apply for assistance with certain agencies, knowing that there is aid for them with their utilities or other things are foreign to them. You're speaking a foreign language. And while those of us that are entrenched know that there are certain agencies that will provide housing counseling, that will provide subsidies and other things, these people have not had to exist in this world. And so the mounting stress usually leads to poor decisions, which compound their debt and which often compound other factors in their relationships, which cause them to alienate from other people because they don't know how to express what it is that they're feeling. And when we look at the individuals that are in poverty, we know that there is a higher likelihood that they're experiencing mental illness, that they're experiencing depression from the fact that they're living without resources. There was a beautiful study that was done that tried to identify whether or not homelessness causes mental illness or mental illness leads to homelessness. And what they identified is that there's this weird symbiotic relationship, that individuals who lack certain coping skills are less likely to be able to stabilize their residence, but individuals who had a stable residence and lose that because they go through the stress of not being able to identify where they're going to eat, that all of those hierarchy of needs are not met and they're unsure as to how they're going to be able to meet those needs, that begins to increase not just their stress level, but has an actual hormonal change. And that results in them experiencing mental illness, the likes of which they've never experienced in their life. And without being able to get access to good health care, without having access to many resources, these individuals then develop behaviors that reinforce their situation and often result in them remaining in that state. So not to leave you on a bad note, how do we deal with that? And there are some best practices that we've been able to identify that I'd like to share with you on the next slide. When I first started working for the Affordable Housing Alliance, our CEO said that when she wanted to approach our role as a CAA, she never wanted to reinvent the wheel. And I took that to heart. And so I coined the phrase symbiotic services. I realized that it wasn't necessary for people in the community to know who I am, that there were companies, that there were agencies, that there were social service groups, that there were religious groups that had been working in those communities for generations that people knew and would go to for help, but didn't have the resources or the know-how in order to assist them. And so what I learned is that if we created a symbiotic relationship rather than a parasitic relationship, we could provide them with the resources and the information that we have in order to empower them to be able to assist the individuals, that their agency works with. And so we've created a network of affiliates that expands all across Monmouth County. I tell individuals all the time that they are literally no less than 5 miles from the Affordable Housing Alliance, no matter where they live. We have agencies that we work with throughout the county that are embedded in those communities, that know the individuals by name, that know their children, that have been working with some of them for generations. And now they're able not just to provide the services that they offer, but services that we offer, and they're knowledgeable about the other services that the agencies that we affiliate with offer. The next thing is that one size only fits one. And I think for too many years, we've seen that there's been a one-size-fits-all approach, that we know that some things are best practices. So we tend to just say, let's push this model and it'll work. Housing First is a great model, but it doesn't work for everyone. And so how do we customize those things and build bundles in order to create success? There was a study done that identified that if you can provide an individual 3 concurrent services, they have a 3-fold likelihood of increasing their success. Think about that for a minute. If you could find a way to add 2 additional services to the services that you're currently providing the individuals that you're helping, your statistics, your numbers would increase, and you would see positive changes in the community that you're trying to serve. And lastly, I learned how to say no. And I think that this is the most important thing. Oftentimes, people will come to us requesting assistance. I can give you a brief example since this is my last slide. We had an individual who came in. She was a gig worker. She played in a band. And when she played, she did very well. She played in very expensive venues that paid her, tremendously. She had an apartment that she couldn't afford. This is pre-pandemic. And it got to a point where she was about 3 months behind. It exceeded what we would have normally provided. And she said, I just need you to pay my back rent. And we told her, no, we can't do that. We can provide you with help for a security deposit for a place that you can afford, but we can't assist you in staying in a place that we know it's going to be toxic. You're going to be pouring more money than you have. You're going to increase your debt. You're going to use all the services that we're able to provide you, and we won't be able to assist you again for another year. Saying no to her allowed her to work with one of our affiliates to find affordable housing, allowed us to assist her with security deposit and first month's rent, to allow her to build some of the money that she was earning so that she had a little bit of a safety net and a nest egg. And so we've been able to take all of these practices, all of these efforts, if you would, in order to create approaches for individuals that fit their individual needs and that help them achieve success. And I'd love to share more with you. I'm excited to hear what our other panelists have to share. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Peter. That was really, really helpful. I'm blown away by some of the information that you're providing, and especially the sort of the vulnerability of that sort of middle income population, and how, it's literally a skill that you learn how to access these assistance programs and support services, and how that is actually setting this other tier of still people that are low and moderate income, but not typically presenting at at social service agencies. That's absolutely fascinating. We're going to transition over to the panel, but I also wanted to mention that we've got another person joining us on the panel. Linda Osborne is a case manager at AHA, and she is directly working with individuals and listening to stories, and I think she's got some practical advice to offer the panel conversation. And I want to start with her. I want to my experience with some of these assistance programs and the way that priorities are made is that people are especially people in this middle income category that Peter was talking about. I feel like they're going to break the mold of our our tried and true checklists and scoring criteria, and that we've got to maybe revisit the way that we're ranking these situations and collecting information. Linda, I'm curious to know if you have any comments on that or any thoughts.
Thank you for having me. Yes, we have had people apply for the foreclosure program that we counsel, mostly right now just to get involved with the forbearance with their mortgage lenders. So of course there's no filings for foreclosure right now, and no one's been served. So foreclosure mediation on a whole is very low, but we are ramping up here at the Affordable Housing Alliance, getting a lot of training in for all of our newer counselors to be able to handle the rush that we expect come January, February, March, and April and May, I'm sure. We examine individual instances, why they cannot pay their mortgage, when they have fallen behind. And we are registering people for the NJHMFA program for a lot of different things. COVID-19, we're getting them assistance, applying for the forbearances, and we will be working with them as soon as December 31st comes, getting their packages ready for foreclosure loan modifications, going to their lenders. If they do qualify for the mediation program, getting them involved and signed up for the mediation program. So we hope that we're well equipped. We're bracing for a lot of work ahead of us, but I think here the counselors at the Affordable Housing Alliance are very well informed with the problem, and we will be able to handle it in the future. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Linda. It's interesting to hear what it's like, you know, in talking with these people and trying to help them apply for these programs. And I feel like that, you know, and I mentioned it in my earlier remarks, that little bit of technical assistance may be a difference maker, but for someone's housing stability in the future. And I applaud you for, you know, all that work and everything that you do. Alieza, I know that you and I spoke about this one in a pre-call recently about, and then Katie jumped on it with a question, or touched on it with a question about the collection of data. You know, we are the host state of the eviction lab, and we would love to be part of the analysis. Yeah, Katie asked what it took to make those relationship with those counties, and if there's some way that we can, you know, my thought would be, is there any way we can help facilitate those relationships here in New Jersey?
You know, I would absolutely be thrilled to welcome that sort of partnership. We, as of last week, 2 weeks ago, got New York City online. You know, that took it was a big push for us, but I think was an important addition to our eviction tracking system. The two requisites that we've been using to add cities and states to our eviction tracking system is, one, whether we have historical data, which we do for New Jersey, and second is whether we can digitally scrape records from county websites. And that is sort of the trickier question. So if you all are in touch with folks that, you know, are excited or willing to make that easier, you know, unfortunately, part of the problem with the housing crisis, you know, this hasn't been studied because of racism and you know, so, you know, this has been an issue that has been ignored for so long. But my colleague, Matt Desmond, has testified before Congress in support of, you know, federal data collection to also sort of study and, you know, fully understand, you know, the scope of the problem and make it more of a public good. So we would be thrilled to be put out of a job in that sense. But until then, you know, if you all are in touch with folks at OPR, like, absolutely let us know. We would be happy to, you know, we would love to add New Jersey. So yeah.
Wonderful. Yeah, I'd like to talk to you. We could issue some sort of support package that we could send out to the counties and try to work together to make that happen. I don't want to be the only one asking questions here and sort of take over the panel. So if any of the other panelists have some comments or reactions from other things that were said, I'd more than welcome them. And in addition, if anybody has any questions for the panel, please, there's a Q&A box at the bottom. I think I used the word chat earlier, but the best way to ask a question is use that Q&A box.
I'll chime in and on this front. So building our relationships with the courts is something that we've been trying to work on and certainly want to into the future. For example, in Delaware, they are directly connecting people trying to do some sort of kind of eviction filing to getting them the support. And that's really what we would like to do at the state level of, okay, instead of starting this filing, let's try and see if we can divert it. Having come from a county when I was prior to being at the state, we were able to work with our sheriff's office and get people, get the sheriff's office to give out housing counseling information to everybody. And also we had a registry that allowed us to reach out to people because the lenders were required to file. It has been a little trickier to get access to that data. There are some new rules where DCA has a kind of registry system that's not available to the public, but it is internal to the government. And I think the issue really is that our experience is that a lot of the counties have a different setup. And so being able to scrape it or getting that data is not so easy. And they just might not have the mechanism to do so, which is why we've been told we would have to Oprah it, which is not going to work in a timely fashion to actually intervene. But I'm optimistic that maybe we can set something up at the state level.
If I can just piggyback off of Katie's comment. I mean, there are counties in the US, probably also in New Jersey, where we have to send a researcher in person to collect paper records. So it's not feasible for us to do that for all the counties of the United States right now. So I think this is the type of thing where, it is important to communities to know, like, we recently partnered with ProPublica on an investigation in Arkansas where eviction is actually considered a criminal matter. So people can go to jail for not paying rent. It's a modern iteration of debtor's prison, but there was a case of a woman who was incorrectly served, but when she began investigating with her neighbors, realized that her landlord had been predominantly serving the women of color, and particularly Black women in her building. And so she ultimately fought that case and won, but it is sort of the type of thing that, this isn't just an individual matter. It's, a question of the family well-being, of community well-being. When I talk with tenants now, it's not unusual for them to admit to depression or suicidal ideation, or for their kids to be, struggling. I spoke with a tenant in August who the eviction notice was served to his 12-year-old daughter, who then had to, translate that notice to him over the phone. So, these are the types of experiences that we're encountering. And I think that in terms of what New Jersey can do, I think that making social services easy to access, that is absolutely something that can be facilitated at the state and local level. We know that in some states, part of the issue around accessing rental assistance or unemployment assistance has to do with, bureaucratic barriers as well, not just the amount of money available, but how easy it is to get that money. And right now is not really the time for families to have to file, 15 or 20 papers to get access to emergency rental assistance. So that's something that I certainly want to flag for you all as something that I think is like an easier fix at the state or local level than it is necessarily at the federal level. Yeah.
Thank you. We got a question in the chat from Maria Huega. She's asking about that. She says her experience is that the existing nonprofit counseling agencies are over capacity. Peter, do you have any comments on that? Whether is that resonating with you, at least on the ground?
I can definitely say that we're seeing a dramatic increase. I was sharing with you yesterday that over a 2-month period, we provided more assistance than we had provided in the previous year. If that gives you any idea of, the volume, and we fully anticipate that, once the moratoria are lifted, that we're going to see what would look like a tsunami. Things have kind of quieted down a little bit because we know that there are a lot of people who are relying on the fact that right now I don't have to pay, and they're hoping against hope that something will happen that will, provide some miracle assistance. But once all of those go through, we're just going to be inundated.
Interesting. Katie, you mentioned that the HMFA was funding counseling for or mediation services for renters. I'm curious to know what that looks like as far as the experience between the landlords and the tenant. Is this a mandatory mediation, or is there some
No, mediation
voluntary?
is the foreclosure term. So that is
Oh.
mandatory if you're going to enter and that's law now in New Jersey, that if you're entering foreclosure mediation, you are required to have a certified counselor, which is great. The renter assistance, that was really just kind of a disaster response of currently. And to the question that we just got, I think that that's very likely because one, we pivoted to, it's something we wanted to do. And this kind of gave us the opportunity, for lack of a better word, to be able to expand that program and those resources. And we've found that it's been, unfortunately, a little bit chicken or egg, whereas housing counseling agencies or agencies that have that service, they're not able to keep people on staff without a funding source for this. And when there's not a funding source, then, so now there is a funding source, and I hope that people can bulk up and bring on more capacity, but I understand why that would be really hard. And for a long time, there was really only money for the foreclosure. So.
Mark, if I could jump in with
Jonathan Gershon raised, sure, please go right ahead.
So as I stated earlier, I represent a community action agency. That's funded through the Community Service Block Grant, and the focus there is to provide individuals with who are experiencing poverty with assistance that they need to rise out of poverty. That funding is some of the most flexible federally funded grants you will ever see. And one of the things that we're able to do is we're able to fund things like renter counseling or landlord-tenant mediation. And so every county in New Jersey, every county in the country has a community action agency that has that funding that is allocated specifically for that county. And that might be a great place to start. AHA happens to be, fortunate enough to both be the community action agency and a housing counseling agency. And so, we're often able, to work together. I'm able to work with the other directors in order to tie in services. But we also work with a lot of the agencies within the community, and we're able to work with them on a ground level. And since we pay landlords, to be honest with you, I will actually have landlords who will reach out to me and say, I have this person, they've been a good tenant, I don't want to evict them, what can we do? And even if it's more than the assistance I can provide, I can work with other agencies. And so sometimes we're able to function as that middle ground. And again, it becomes that kind of a symbiotic relationship. How can we take what it is that we have and empower other individuals to be able to assist? So that might be an approach that, you can look at in the future in order to assist these individuals.
If I can just jump
That's
in before
excellent.
we move on to the next question. I know that Washington University in St. Louis, for example, is studying the rise in 211 phone calls. For instance, there has been a massive spike amidst the pandemic, Maria. So yes, we know our social services, housing services, et cetera, are extremely overtaxed right now. And I think that is also a reason that federal action is really important moving forward, is that, with tax bases shrinking due to rising unemployment, states and localities are going to probably have less money in 2021 to combat this growing insecurity that we're seeing across communities in the United States. So I think in terms of what we can do at the state and local level and what we can do at the federal level, I think that is helpful. And I think that to Peter's, important comment just now, unfortunately, I have also seen in the last couple of months a lot of reticence by some landlords to accept rental assistance if their tenants are so proactive as to be able, or lucky as to be able to secure that assistance. So in the case that I mentioned before, where the landlord had delivered the notice to the tenant's daughter, that tenant John actually secured rental assistance. The landlord cashed a check for thousands of dollars and is still suing their tenant. So, I think I think it's just useful information that as we think about, what measures can be taken at the state and local level, making sure that there are, anti-discrimination provisions attached to those measures are really important because, you know, we are, and this is not just something that I'm sharing anecdotally, but we are seeing that some landlords don't want to accept rental assistance if it would prevent them from later evicting a tenant. So, you know, we've also seen landlords, you know, file things like nuisance orders to try and get around eviction moratoriums. So it might be that, you know, kids are noisy, you know, or they, you know, draw on the walls, they do normal kid things, but that a landlord might try and find a way around an eviction moratorium in order to secure a new or different tenant. So those are just things that, you know, we're percolating on. So as we think about how to make more money available, how to make it easily available to Peter's point, and what other types of provisions should be included. Something that could be thought about, you know, at the state level is that, you know, New Jersey or community courts could make it more expensive for landlords to file evictions. So in the state of Maryland, a landlord actually doesn't have to inform a tenant that they're filing an eviction. They can just go ahead and file. And then, you know, they can that eviction process in less than a week. So a tenant could not know that their landlord is filing against them and then lose their home without an opportunity for something like mediation. So we do see success, for instance, in counties where it is more expensive to file. A landlord needs an attorney to file because we have seen in the last decade that landlords are using the courts increasingly to collect rent as opposed to eject tenants that are, you know, bad or that they don't like for whatever reason that might be. And so, you know, those are, I think, things to keep in mind. We see higher eviction rates in states where it's easier to evict tenants. So that, again, that's something that absolutely can be changed at the county or state level. So if you think, in thinking about this, I would recommend trying to push for that. And you know, I think that there is a community court model in New York City, I believe in Queens, in Red Hook, and they have seen a lot of success in both financing mediation for tenants and landlords, and also trying to plug in emergency rental assistance before we get to the point of an eviction execution. Yeah.
Well, I have a couple follow-ups to that. One, the Pandemic Relief Fund in New Jersey, the network and others are going to be trying to do some work that is that more legal mediation aspect of it. So be on the lookout for that. That's something that, you know, I'm speaking out of school here, but I would love to make permanent right to counsel in New Jersey. And to your point about the eviction filings, that's also something that we can, you know, we can work on. We effectively made an additional fee for foreclosures, and that's what funds the housing counseling program. I would love to do that for evictions as well. Have you seen, for my own edification, what is the tipping point? Like, how expensive do we need to make it to get people in?
I can tell you, like, we did a comparison, and I can share this in the chat. My colleague Lillian Leung did a study of what we call serial eviction filings. So when a landlord files an eviction multiple times against the same tenant over the course of the year. So again, this is a way in which landlords are using courts that are actually funded by taxpayers to collect rent. They don't actually have the intent of removing the tenant, but they automate the eviction process in the event that a tenant is, let's say, 1 to 2 days late on rent. Let's say, you know, you're at a grocery store, you didn't get enough hours this month, maybe you have like slightly less than your full rental payment. So we'll see the same landlord tenant names show up multiple times in court records. That study compared Charleston, South Carolina to Mobile, Alabama. And I mean, surprising to me, Mobile has both, I think the filing fees are closer to $200, which is different than the $30 filing fee in South Carolina. So like, that's the type of thing, if it were to be something closer to a couple $100s, you know, I think that would be an important way to make sure that, you know, eviction is not natural. It should be a method of last resort, for emergency cases. And, humans need shelter to be well and thrive. So certainly we should also be thinking about how to detach losing one's home from rental debt, so those are the types of things that we're thinking about, but certainly increasing the amount of money a landlord might need to use to file would be helpful as well. You could also require that landlords need to certify that they're not, anyway, we can continue this conversation offline, but I think that those are sort of the starting points that I would think about. And then certainly a right to counsel, since folks don't have a right to an attorney in civil court, and housing is a civil matter. So we really have a very unbalanced system of quote unquote justice when it comes to housing issues in particular. And it certainly does not help that, housing evictions are executed by local law enforcement, and I think it goes without saying after, the experiences of this year that is additionally traumatizing for communities who have been, traumatized by police violence for decades, if not centuries. So things to keep in mind. Yeah.
Interesting. I'm getting a reminder in my chat with Lindsay that she needs to push out another question. And while she does that, I want to, Steve asked a couple of questions, one of which I attempted to answer, which is about funding for improving and ramping up the services of organizations like J. I mentioned that in the answer that this about $5 billion of the CARES Act funding was pushed through the Community Development Block Grant Program, and some really big changes were made to the way in which those funds were distributed and the way they can be used locally. One of the things that can be done with those funds is to support organizations like Peters and other what's considered public services that are responding to preventing the transmission of COVID-19. So there's certainly a funding available through the CARES Act, through the CDBG program. And in fact, there's even more funding being made available in a different way through the Department of Community Affairs, our New Jersey Department of Community Affairs, where it touches a lot more, not just the small cities, municipalities. There's money virtually available all across the state. And if anybody has any questions about accessing those dollars, you can feel free to email me directly or give me a call. Okay, so we've got another question that looks like it's just wrapping up. Steve also had a question about whether or not, Alieza, you think that there's a model state out there that's sort of doing tenant landlord right. Anything jump at mind?
So, I mean, we host a housing policy scorecard on our website. So we have been tracking, for instance, what parts of the eviction process have been frozen throughout 2020. We have been tracking that. We've been tracking, what funds states are making available. I will say that no one U.S. state has fixed the housing crisis. Certainly we have been looking to, what works in what has been working in Canada, for instance, or in other parts of the world where housing is enshrined as a human right, or where shelter is guaranteed, or there are other, court models, or, so I think that, we certainly can keep in mind that, that there are, neighboring countries with less resources that are tackling this in different ways. There are some states like Massachusetts, for instance, and Connecticut that had very robust eviction moratoria for several months, but those have since expired. So, as of last week, there were 15 states that had an eviction moratorium in place, including New Jersey, but only 7 of which we would consider to be robust, meaning that they freeze the first stages of the eviction process, or they freeze all of those stages. So, other things that we're considering, for example, like, is a state preventing utility shutoffs right now? Is a state preventing late fees from being levied on tenants? Late fees are not levied if someone goes into foreclosure mediation. That's a right that homeowners have that tenants do not have. It's just one of the many ways in which, property ownership is enshrined in US law, but tenant rights are not as strongly enshrined at all. So while, a homeowner could go into mediation and have 180 days to, to work out that plan right now under the CDC order, those same rights are not extended to tenants at this point in time. So I think that we can also think beyond what US states are doing and think about, other types of policies and what has been successful in other parts of the world. Yeah.
Interesting. Lindsay reminded me we've got two more questions to get through. I'm sorry to keep doing this, but we're going to put one up now, and then we'll do the last one at the end. So I'd love to unpack I'd love to unpack a little bit more this idea of tenant mediation. And what these things look like on the ground, because I'm working with a town that's talking about this and has got some interest from the local judge, and I'm interested to sort of see, like, is this a mandatory? Are these typically mandatory mediations? Are they voluntary? And if they're voluntary, what's the carrot that brings a landlord to the table aside from the possibility of getting paid rent?
I think there are some, and don't quote me on this, but it's been a while since I've looked at the New York model when they expanded their pilot from the South Bronx to now it's enshrined. I am fairly confident that there is some sort of mandatory mediation, and look, if the landlord wants to do it, that's the only way that it's going to get done. And so, kind of to the point about raising the price of an eviction, you got to make it worth it. So if it can't be a $50 in late rent.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah. I mean, I will say that, like, mediation alone is not going to solve this problem. Like, it's impossible to mediate between a landlord and tenant if the tenant doesn't have any money because, they are a laid off nurse or home care worker or childcare worker or truck driver. Like, we can't, I mean, I think that's part of the issue right now, is that there are certainly medium and longer term solutions to this housing crisis. And I would say that thinking through, again, this is a good time for us to reevaluate, like, what is our system of justice and what should it look like moving forward, and I would like to see, that no one is made homeless in the future because we have found ways to, address the financial well-being of tenants in a comprehensive and empathetic way. But that being said, I think right now, I mean, people just need money. We have a saying that, the rent eats first. So, people shouldn't be making decisions about foregoing, like, paying for an inhaler or insulin right now because they have to pay for their rent. Or we know that a lot of food banks, for instance, are run by volunteers, and that, that has also affected how much food assistance or other types of assistance are available right now, since they have partially been driven through, private charity in addition. Yeah. So I think those are the types of things that would be helpful, but often the solutions have to work in tandem. Like, a moratorium alone is not enough. Rent relief is, again, not enough because of the discrimination we know is baked into our housing system. So, I think thinking through the ways that a moratorium plus rent relief plus changes to our court model would be helpful together.
Interesting. Yeah, I was fortunate enough to be able to sit in on a focus group with a client that was interviewing nonprofits in their community about the struggles and impacts of COVID-19. And one of the things that really surprised me was something you just mentioned, Alieza, and that is the fact that the volunteers are, their ability to, the volunteers themselves were reluctant to continue to participate. And in fact, the one organization that sort of went into great detail about this, all of their volunteers were senior citizens and the most vulnerable population for contracting COVID-19. And it created a serious delivery issue with their program, which I found very surprising and fascinating at the same time.
Yeah.
Peter, you mentioned something earlier. I heard it because you mentioned it to me yesterday, and it really struck me. And
Mark, I think your audio is just cutting out, at least for me. So if you don't mind repeating the
Same here.
question, that would be helpful. I think your video is also frozen as well. Oh.
I'll put up a polling question while we're waiting for Mark's audio and video to get going again.
Okay.
Good timing.
Maybe this is like a good time to remind people that Zoom evictions are bad because even people who are relatively better off right now also have issues connecting to video meetings. So I don't know if this is something that's being handled court to court, but there are many counties that are currently doing Zoom eviction hearings, which present important due process challenges that we absolutely need to be addressing as well. So not to be too opportunistic, but yeah.
Like
Lindsay, if
Mark is back. Okay, that's great.
Okay, Mark.
Nice to see you again, Mark.
it's good to be seen. I'm sorry about that. It's 2020.
We did a polling question while you were waiting.
Perfect. I don't know, Peter, I don't know if I mentioned enough of my question or got close enough to it that you understood where I was headed, but this concept of like telling people to walk away from their relatively stable housing situation seems like a crazy departure from everything that we know about, stay in place, that is always, the mantra that everybody has, even prior to pandemic, that the moment of being unstably housed is what sort of cascades into these other issues. How is that as an organization to struggle with those decisions?
I will tell you that I don't sleep very much, but it is very interesting. One of the things, and honestly, the woman that I mentioned, her case sealed the deal for me. Being able to see her thrive in an affordable unit in her new economy, if you would, was life-changing, because what it told me was that oftentimes we fail because we failed. We assumed that the approach that we've used for everyone will work for everyone. And so we just keep kind of churning out, the same thing. We're a service agency. We provide rental assistance. You come in, you owe money, we'll pay what you owe. And realizing that it's not helping a family if they have to come back to me 2, 3, 4 years with increasing debt. If you're coming back to me year 2 and you owe half of what you owed the previous year, then some of the interventions that we did helped you. We may not have resolved everything, but there was progress. And I've learned to look at the beginning and identify whether or not the solution that we would normally provide is going to work. And if not, we have to think outside of the box. And sometimes it's not my agency that needs to be the lead. Sometimes I need to send you to another agency that we can work along with that will be able to help you identify. And in her case, to, what everyone was saying regarding landlord-tenant mediation, saying to a landlord, listen, she owes you back rent. If you're willing to let her out of her lease now, you can get someone in that will be able to afford the place that you have. We'll make sure that you get paid for whatever it is that you owe, and she'll be able to move into a place that she can afford. And so to your carrot and stick, it's sometimes letting the landlord know this is what works for you. this is what will work for them. One of my early psychology teachers told me, anytime you're in any form of counseling session, your first approach is always what's called a win-win. The acronym is what's important now. For the landlord, what's important now is getting paid. They may have a mortgage that they have to pay. They may have other debt that they're counting on that income for. And for the tenant, they need a safe space to live. And so if you can find a way to give everybody what they need right now, then you can successfully mediate any of those situations. And it makes it a little bit easier to make those hard decisions.
I've got one last question. I'm hoping all of you could maybe chime in with a comment. If you were to give some advice to a person at the local level that is, you know, has a direct connection with the affordable housing portfolio in their community, if you could give them some things to be doing between now and the lifting of the, you know, moratoriums, what advice would you give these people? Where do you think the gaps are going to be? Where do you think the needs are going to be to supplement what we hope will be a robust and far-reaching, you know, series of assistance programs?
I mean, to sound like a broken record, I would say, I think both to make eviction difficult and also to make social services like easy to access, as well as, you know, available to folks who may have trouble with their credit, may have had an experience with incarceration, may have had an experience with abuse of some kind. You know, we did see that with the CARES Act and stimulus checks, you know, there are whole populations that did not receive any sort of support, either because they come from immigrant communities, are undocumented, or may have had, you know, one of the experiences that I mentioned, and, you know, they also deserve aid and support right now. So again, I think, you know, if we can think inclusively and holistically to Peter's, you know, very important point, you know, I think continually improving and casting a wider net at the local level with our social services, and doing so with empathy and solidarity, I think is sort of, you know, part of a winning strategy. So I'll leave it at that.
I guess if I were to give any advice, the first thing that I would say is that it's imperative that we begin, especially with the COVID pandemic, to look outside of our norms. There are many people that we're used to being able to reach, but there are so many people who are now falling into the category of people we're providing assistance to who are new. They don't understand what to do. They don't understand, you know, where to go. And so being able to reach people quickly who are not normally reached by, you know, our normal marketing efforts, that's going to be key. And the other thing is, you know, being able to reach out to other agencies, working hand in hand. You know, oftentimes grants make us, you know, competitive. I'm applying for it, you're applying for it, one of us is going to get it, someone's a winner, someone's a loser. But if we learn to work cooperatively, I mean, truly work cooperatively, learning that we're going to be able to positively impact the community and be able to positively impact our agencies, because we're helping more individuals, we're reaching our goals together and bringing other people along, you know, on that journey, I think that we'll see success and we'll be able to help mitigate some of the individuals who would normally fall through the cracks.
A few additions to my colleagues. You know, Mark, you asked about a connection to the affordable housing portfolio, and if it's something that's a restricted affordable housing development, I would say that additionally, if there's anybody on this call that is the property manager or owns any of those buildings, dig deep. Something that I think we're worried about is that because there have been missed payments, people now have operational strain, and some of those buildings we've encouraged them to dig into their R&R or anything else so that they can make it work throughout this crisis without raising any rents or having to evict people. And I would say, call your legislators, ask for more federal funding.
Good call. Linda, I'm hopeful that you have a couple of comments to share with us here at the end on what you think your local public officials and people working on this in this world on affordable housing with how they could help, their people and the people that's in their community, as well as help you make it easier job for you when they make it to your desk.
Oh, absolutely. We could certainly need any help we can get. But I just wanted to point out too, while this crisis is going on, the Affordable Housing Alliance does have a program called the Financial Success Center in conjunction with the United Way. And we do urge tenants and homeowners to attend our center, to work one-on-one with a counselor, to achieve any goal that they'd like to, which would be improving their credit issues, paying down debt, getting on the waiting list for more affordable rentals, and also increasing their income. We also work with them to save money and different tactics to empower themselves and hopefully not be in this situation again. So we do urge people to come and call us to see a counselor for the Financial Success Center. I think that it would just improve their situation so much better and able to transition into a more affordable property.
It's a great point. Yeah, I love the idea of kind of converging what is traditional financial assistance and training with sort of resiliency and helping stave off the threats that are people find themselves under right now. Well, it looks like we are out of time. There's going to be one more box before everybody jumps off. There's going to be one more pop-up on your screen, I believe, that will ask you to very quickly fill out a little evaluation on our program today, see what people are thinking about it and how we can help develop programs in the future. Ed, I don't know if you have.
It will actually appear right after I click end. It will pop up in the browser. So if people could just don't close your browser immediately, just give it a moment.
Thanks, Lindsay. I appreciate the subtle
subtle
difference. And I don't know if you had any parting words for the group here today.
Well, I did, Mark, and thank you. First, I'd like to thank this wonderful panel for taking the time. As Peter said, time is at a premium right now with us trying to juggle everything. And we appreciate very much all of the insights that you shared with our participants. We had 47 folks on the webinar. And I think you imparted a lot of good practical information to them. We have representatives of the administrative agents. We have a number of members of local affordable housing boards, and all of them want to engage in trying to address the crisis. And I think you shared a lot of good practical information with them to do that. So on behalf of affordable housing professionals, we thank you for taking the time, panelists. I also like to thank Mark and Gail and all the members of our program committee for putting this together, and Lindsay for all the technological assistance she always provides to us. Please fill out the questionnaire. And if you have other topics, participants or folks on the panel, you would like us to address next year in a similar kind of format, we would certainly welcome that you send that information to us, and we'll try to put together yet another panel and another panel and another panel until we can all meet again in presence. I mean, in one in-person meeting. So again, thank you, everyone. Hang on for Lindsay so that you can evaluate us, and I hope everybody has a good day. Thank you.